Millions upon billions of euros, pounds, dollars, rupees, you name it, is spent by racing teams designing and building and fettling their latest creations to beat the competition on track. But sometimes, and more often than you think, these cars end up stillborn, never actually making it all the way from drawing board to racing tarmac. And some of those cars are as awesome as their lack of competition time is intriguing. Here are 8 such cars. And if you do enjoy this video, you know what I'm going to say. Hit that like button, maybe that subscribe button, and that bell icon's really nice. Maybe you should click it, and then you'll see everything we do here at Good Road Racing. And I'll start with a ridiculously cool Alfa Romeo. Probably the prettiest car on this entire list, and the one that makes us spend the most time wondering just what might have been. There was a time when pretty much everyone built a Group C car. Porsche, Jaguar, Sauber, Mazda, Peugeot, those are the ones that we remember, but Ford, Aston Martin, Lancia and more all got in on the act. When some shenanigans meant that regulations changed to incorporate high-revving 3.5 litre engines almost directly ported across from Formula 1, Lancia decided enough was enough and bowed out. But the Fiat Group was not done with endurance racing yet. The plan was to transfer the entry from Lancia to its sister brand Alfa Romeo. A Group C car would derive from Turin, and chat began that it would be powered by a Ferrari V12 as development moved on. What the project became was the very snappily titled Alfa Romeo SE 048 SP, and it had a 3.5 litre V10 engine which had developed for the bonkers, but also stillborn, Alfa Romeo 164 Pro car program. And perhaps a Ligier Formula 1 car, but less is known about that. It had 620 horsepower and screamed past 10,000 RPM. But the program meandered eventually to its demise. Money was diverted away from an Alfa Romeo Group C project into Lancia's hideously successful WRC program. And the development of the 155 DTM and BTCC racer also gobbled up a load of cash. The SE 048 SP was consigned to what-if videos like this. Porsche won Le Mans in 1998 for the 17th time, and then, to any observer, it seemed to just quit sports car racing entirely. But, in secret, it was rumoured to be plotting a return, ready to race in the new top-class LMP regulations with a car code named 9R3. 9R3 had a flat 6 based on the one in the road-going 911, but eventually Porsche decided that engine was just far too heavy, too flawed, and would be needing so much cooling it really could not go racing. It could have canned the project right there and then, but it decided to soldier on. In 1992, Porsche designed a V10 engine to be used in a footwork Formula 1 car. This engine was largely unused, but the design was still available and would fit perfectly into the 9R3. While still refusing to publicly acknowledge anything or any kind of project, Porsche started working on what would now be called the LMP2000. The LMP2000 used the 9R3 chassis, pretty much unaltered, but it had the new V10 engine with redesigned mounts and a new suspension layout. Testing went well, with drivers Alan McNish and Bob Wallach giving Porsche positive feedback, but then, like every other car in this list, the project was canned. We can pretty safely assume the cash was diverted into the Cayenne project, and Porsche decided it didn't want to compete against Audi and Bentley. Even then, and with knowledge of the LMP2000 widespread, Porsche flatly refused to acknowledge that it had ever existed for over 15 years. Eventually, the LMP2000 finally made its public debut at the Festival of Speed presented by MasterCard in 2018. But not all was lost in the intervening 19 years. A version of the 700 horsepower 5.5 litre V10 engine would be used in the Carrera GT hypercar. Peugeot finished 2nd, 3rd and 4th at Le Mans in 2011. The latest version of the Peugeot 908 had been slightly slower than its rival Audi R18, but it was more efficient, and the driving trio of Sébastien Bourdais, Simon Pagenaud and Pedro Lamy was so close to the final R18 in the final hour that the organisers abandoned the final laps parade format and told the teams to battle to the bitter end. The following season, the regulations changed, allowing hybrid cars to battle for victory and establishing the World Endurance Championship. Peugeot, now expecting to battle not just against Audi, but Toyota as well, and for a world championship, developed a successor to the 908. It was called the 908 Hybrid 4, and it was not actually the first hybrid LMP1 car that Peugeot had designed. Back in 2008, the team had created and shown the 908 HY and even ran the car. For 2012's new era, not only did Peugeot enter as the reigning champions of the outgoing Intercontinental Le Mans Cup, they had a potential advantage. In fact, so far down the development process was the 908 Hybrid 4 that it was shown at the Geneva Motor Show back in 2011. The team was well through its testing process and in position for more at Sebring when the call came. Peugeot's hierarchy had cancelled the whole project. Under pressure, after a €400 million loss, the French marque was teetering near bankruptcy and decided to end its motorsport association rather than continue, depriving us of a potentially barnstorming first WEC season, and the 908 Hybrid 4 of ever being seen in action. To say that 2002 was a disappointing season for McLaren, well, it would be understating it a little bit. World champions in 1999, the team from Woking had been Ferrari's only opposition for the next couple of years as the Schumacher-Ferrari partnership asserted its dominance. So, a third place finish in 2002 with a single win wasn't really what Ron Dennis and co wanted. Already a Formula One design legend, Adrian Newey set about attempting to haul his team's fortunes back around with a totally new platform for 2003. The original plan would have seen a developed version of the unsuccessful MP4-17 race under the name MP4-17D for the first few races, allowing development of its successor to be fully realised. Well, that was the plan. And if it had worked, the MP4-18 wouldn't be in this video now, would it? Instead of piling in extra testing miles before exploding onto the scene, what actually happened was the MP4-18 crashed. And then it crashed again, and possibly again, all for reasons that were never fully explained. Eventually, McLaren basically gave up and decided that results with the old chassis were actually good enough to continue with it for the rest of the 2003 season. And so, McLaren finished third again. Not actually that far behind Ferrari and Williams in the end. McLaren would skip the MP4-18 altogether, instead starting the 2004 season with the MP4-19, a car that turned out to be so bad it was replaced mid-season with a dramatically revised machine. Maybe they should have persevered with the MP4-18 after all. Before we go on, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching our video. We appreciate that you do. And if you do enjoy it, hit that like button, subscribe and do all the other things. And then I'll talk to you about the quite incredible Lancia ECV. When Group B started to get a little bit too fast for the FIA, the powers that be decided it was time for something else. That something else was to be Group S. Group S cars would have less power than the outrageously grunty Group B machines, with top whack limited to around 300 horsepower. But in return, homologation rules were relaxed further. Much further. Rather than having to make 200 road cars, the manufacturers now had to make 10. This, the FIA hoped, would bring out more innovative and interesting designs, while the power limit would keep the butterflies developing in FIA HQ's stomach at a more reasonable level. If you look at any of the cars that were being developed for Group S through 1986, it seems that they were about to get what they wanted. Audi had the 002 Quattro, Toyota the 222D, Opel created the Cadet Rally 4x4, and Lada, yes, Lada had the Samara S Proto that looked wild. But, out of all of them, trust Lancia to have been the ones to create what looked like the real beast, in the form of its experimental composite vehicle. The ECV was designed with a mid-mounted 1.8-litre turbocharged engine that produced 600 horsepower. Yep, double what the regulations would allow. That engine would be reined in to the requisite 300 to compete, and would have no problem hurling the ECV around, as composite Kevlar carbon fibre bodywork meant it weighed just 930 kilograms. It may have looked a little bit like a Delta S4 with some fancy red martini livery, but it was about as different as a space shuttle is to a Vauxhall Mariva. In this case, the project wasn't closed by the manufacturer. Instead, Group B got all deathy, and the FIA's knees buckled. Group B was banned, Group S was cancelled, and the lower class Group A was elevated to the top of the tree. Those inside the rally paddock claimed that Group S was going to be more exciting than Group A, and a whole lot safer than Group B. Shame. yes, you've seen the Deltawing race. Well, you've seen a Deltawing race. The Deltawing raced at Le Mans. 2 different types of Deltawing raced in the IMSA Sports Car Championship for several years, one of them quite possibly the ugliest car ever to race in that series. But that was not what the Deltawing was originally designed to do. Nope. The Deltawing was designed way back in the late 2000s to replace the incredibly old Dallara that IndyCar was still using when it finally got around to going with something new for 2012. When the tender went out, engineer Ben Balby, along with Panos and Chip Ganassi, developed something revolutionary. A unique concept for racing that would allow cars to run close together, giving better competition and looking totally radical in a world filled with winged racing cars. The Deltawing had 2 tiny front wheels and a pair of bigger ones at the back. The driver sat in the middle of an extremely long, slender machine that had a single fighter jet-style upright fin at the rear and 0 wings. But, sadly for us, I think, IndyCar decided to stick to Dallara for a car that eventually became the DW12, a chassis which is still used in another form to this very day. As good as that car has been to us in the following decade, we were robbed of what would have been an incredible sight. Just imagine 30 original Deltawings racing together. Thankfully, Don Panos and co. saw another use for the Deltawing, adding some lights and a wider cockpit, and went to the more welcoming arms of sports car racing. When F1 regulations changed drastically for 2009, clearing the cars of the massive number of aerodynamic devices that had begun to festoon them to try and make them both look better and be able to follow each other, Toyota was one of the teams that used the change to spring up the grid. The team also decided to focus a lot of its engineering power onto the 2010 car, hoping to build on a succession of podiums and pole positions in 2009 and perhaps even win an F1 race for the first time. The TF110, as the new car was to be called, was apparently an incredibly complex design. It had a brand new concept of diffuser and a very early version of what would be dubbed the F-duct, with which drivers could stall the rear wing at high speeds. That design would become common on cars through 2010, but had Toyota started the season with it, well, it would have had one big old head start. But it didn't. Other than a shakedown with Kazuki Nakajima at the wheel, the man who now runs Toyota Gazoo Racing, it never ran in public. Toyota gave up on F1 at the end of 2009. The never-to-be-seen but allegedly coming one day Stefan GP bought the chassis and wanted to use it in 2011, but we all know that never happened. Volkswagen's Polo WRC is one of the greatest rally cars of all time. In its 4 seasons in the World Championship, it won 43 out of the 53 events it entered, securing 87 podiums and 12 titles. For 2017, the 5th year of Volkswagen's WRC career, the cars were going to get faster, bigger, more powerful and more exciting. They would have proper aero, and there would be more competition with Hyundai, Ford and Volkswagen joined by a returning Toyota. Not only did Volkswagen develop a car for these new rules, they revealed it to the world in a series of press releases. With former champion Marcus Gronholm helping development, as he had the predecessor, it seemed like the obvious favourite. This new Polo GTI WRC was wider, longer, it had a centre differential and a larger turbo restrictor than its predecessor. It had a colossal rear wing and a mighty front splitter. In camo, it looked great. And then someone found out that Volkswagen had been doing some very naughty things with diesel engines in the US and all hell broke loose. Volkswagen called a halt to the entire WRC project just a matter of weeks after the car was revealed. There was talk of selling some cars to privateers, and several people did attempt to get hold of one, but it all came to nothing. The Polo WRC's life was over. Volkswagen made a lower class R5 version for a few years, but then they ostentatiously announced they were quitting motorsport for good. And that was it. Those are some cars that might have changed the face of motorsport forever. Or they could have been rubbish. We'll never know. But which one do you love? Which one do you think might have won a world championship? Let us know in the comments.